questions about the lab or the homework? We have PRs, discussion forums, and we have office hours, so stop by if you have questions. Okay, so we are going to continue the discussion from last time. We were talking about transactional systems and distributed transactions. So we are going to switch gears a little bit and go on to the next topic, or the next couple of topics, which will be on replication and fault tolerance. Okay, so they are somewhat related. You can do replication or have redundancy for performance reasons to get better performance by creating copies of your data or code, or you replicate to handle failures in the system. If one node goes down, one replica goes down, other replicas can take over. So the first part of this discussion is going to focus on replication and what you need to implement in the system to ensure consistency of your replicated data. That's what we are going to talk about today. And then we'll continue that discussion, start talking about fault tolerance. That's the context in which we will talk about Paxos and other things as well. Two-phase commit, three-phase commit. So today we'll talk about consistency model. So today's class is actually mostly about models and definitions rather than implementation. So it may seem a little abstract, but it's good to understand what are the techniques that are not techniques, rather the consistency models that are available to us. And as we go along in subsequent lectures, we will see how real systems implement these models. Okay, so today's discussion might sound a little abstract, but we will try to make it more concrete as we will go along. And you will see that in real systems, you actually take very simple approaches. You don't try to implement very strict consistency models that may be expensive. So, but we will here, for purposes of completeness, we will define the entire spectrum of consistency models. So we'll start with what is replication. You probably understand what replication means. If you recall what we said in the very first or second lecture, we said when you replicate, you can replicate the data, you can replicate the computation, or both. Okay? Replicating the data and replicating the computation are two independent dimensions. Okay? Here you have some application. Okay? The application runs as, let's say, distributed application. So there is some code. If you have multiple copies of it, then you are replicating the code. Okay? The application may have maintain state or data. Okay, the state could be kept on disk or it could be kept in memory. Okay, and if you now replicate the state as well, okay, then you have replicated the data of the application. Here, by data replication, we mean the disk state, not the memory state. But in general, you could also replicate the memory state. Okay. So data replication is very common technique used in distributed systems. It is used for a number of reasons. I already talked about the two key reasons why you want to replicate: better reliability and better performance. Better reliability says that if one node goes down for any reason, and the data on that node now becomes unavailable, you can use another one. Okay, so the application continues to provide access to its data, even though some nodes may have crashed. Okay? You can also get protection against data corruption. If some node experiences data corruption, but data is not lost, you have another copy. Okay? So that is why you do data replication for better reliability. We will talk about providing reliability and fault tolerance subsequently. The other reasons to do this is for better performance, and we also talked about this earlier. So if you have a single copy of the data, okay, the performance of your system is limited by the disk throughput of that system. Okay, if the disk can only support n accesses per second, then that's the number of requests that you can service at any given time. If your application as a whole needs to service a much larger user base than that, then you will need to replicate, because otherwise that disk on that machine is going to be bottleneck. So if you create multiple copies, requests can be serviced in parallel, so you get more parallelism and higher throughput. Okay? So if you do this well, you can scale with the size of the number of replicas. So if you have n replicas, okay, and you have no other bottlenecks, you should be able to sustain n times the throughput of a single replica. So that gives you scale. But typically you may have other bottlenecks, so that you don't get a linear scale up, but that's the ideal you can get in the system. The other way to, other reason for getting performance is geographical distribution. Okay, this is also important in distributed systems where your users may be spread across large geographic area. They could be global, may have users in different continents. Okay. Now if you have replication, okay, then you can always also send the request to the closest replica, so you also get lower latencies. Okay, so you are trying to access, let's say, a web page, and you have created replicas of the web page on each continent, as a European replica, an American replica, Asian replica. Then you can see where the user request is coming from and send it to the closest replica. That will reduce the latency. Okay, the farther away the replica, the more time it is going to take for that request to get to the server and come back. Okay, so you can replicate both for scale as well as scale from a geographical or spatial standpoint. We will talk about geographic replication when we talk about the World Wide Web and web proxies. We'll come back to how we will do this in that context. Okay. Now, with that motivation, there are several issues related to replication. Okay. When to do the replication? Okay. If replication is maybe done statically or it may be done dynamically. As the load goes up, you may create new replicas on the fly. Okay. So there's policy of when do you do replicate. How many replicas to create? Again, if you know the load that is coming into the system, you can decide how many replicas you need. If you do not, then you may have to decide this dynamically. But in any case, the number of replicas should be sufficient to service the volume of the requests that are coming in. Okay, so you need at least as much capacity as the requests that are coming into the system. If you have less capacity than the request volume, then some requests have to be turned away because the replicas get overloaded. Okay, each replica will have a certain capacity. That's the maximum number of requests you can service. Okay, so depending on how many total requests you want to service per unit time, you need at least that many replicas. Okay. So that's the how many part. And then the last part is where should the replicas be located. This goes back to the geographical distribution of your users. Where are the users for this distributed system? Are they concentrated in one geographic area? Are they spread out? Depending on the answer to these questions, you can either put all the replicas in one place if the user base is local, and so you need to put all the replicas just there. But if it's distributed, then you can decide where to put it. Okay, you can say you have one replica on a continent or one replica in each region. So you may have one on the east coast, one on the west coast, just as an example. Okay. So all of these decisions have to be made when you decide to employ replication in your system. Okay, but today we are not going to talk about any of these topics. Okay, we will come back to this in the context of our case studies. When we look at the World Wide Web or some other systems that are large, we will look at how they have implemented specific replication policies. But here, today, as I said, we are going to look particularly at this problem of consistency and look at consistency in one. So we have definitions of what kinds of consistencies you can provide. Okay. So consistency is a problem that arises whenever you have replication. Okay. So you created multiple replicas. Okay. Now you need to keep them consistent with one another. So what does that mean? Okay, the replicas have data. Okay. Let's say data is either read or written to. So if you make a modification to some data item, okay, in your system, and there are multiple copies of that data item on different servers, you want to ensure that all of those copies see this update, see this write. Okay? If you update only one copy and the other copies are not updated, they will be out of sync, they will be inconsistent with respect to one another. So requests for the data item to these other replicas are going to see stale data, out of date data. Okay? Think of web pages, for instance. If a web page is updated at one location, but copies of that web page is not updated at some other location. It could be a newspaper with breaking news or some such thing. And then users going to these other replicas are going to see an old version of that web page. Okay, that's an inconsistent result from the user perspective. So whenever you have replication, you have to ensure consistency. Consistency is going to ensure that you basically get the freshest copy of a data item. So how to do that is the implementation. What consistency guarantees to provide are the semantics. Okay, so today we are going to talk mostly about the semantics. Okay, what kinds of guarantees to provide, and we'll see that there is a whole spectrum of guarantees, starting from the most ideal scenario to some very weak guarantees that you can provide that are nevertheless useful. Okay, so that's basically, and the implementation of it, again, when we talk about replication, you will see what are practical implementation approaches. Okay. Now, from the perspective of designing the system, there are two places where you can implement consistency. One is at the application level, the other is at the middleware level. That's what these two figures show. If you do this at the application level, then it's the application's job, the application designer's job, to decide what consistency guarantees to provide and how to implement consistency techniques that provide those guarantees. It's all done at the application level. Okay, on the other hand, there are many middleware systems that will do this for you. So you, the application programmer, don't have to worry about it. You just write or read data items, and the middleware takes care of figuring out where are the replicas and how to ensure that the replicas are consistent and all of that. So that's implemented at the middleware. Regardless, you still need to define what consistency guarantees are needed and how to implement. Okay? And all this is saying is you can implement them in one of two places. Okay? So I want to distinguish between this notion of replication and caching, because they're somewhat related, okay, in most systems. Okay? So you could, rather than having multiple copies of a data item, okay, another way to achieve scale is you have a single copy of a data item, but you have a cache that caches copies of this data item as well. Okay? So even in that case, your data item is replicated, but in caches, not at the application level. So caches are performance optimization. Okay, so basically, whenever you have a cache, if a request comes in, you first look in the cache. If the data is already in the cache, you service it from the cache. If not, you go to the origin and get it from there. Okay? So caches also provide you a form of replication. Okay? And if you have caching, again, you need to ensure consistency of caching. Okay? So you can get performance or scalability either by employing a cache, in which case you don't need to change the application. You have the application as is, you just deploy a cache that may be distributed that caches copies of the data. There are many scenarios where this is an approach that is actually widely used. So you don't have to go and complicate the application design. If you implement replication at the application level, and the application design itself has to change to handle multiple replicas. Okay, alternate approach that employs caching is the application is centralized. The cache is distributed. So then you are doing replication at the caching level. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. When we look at the web, we will see that often replication in the web is done through caching rather than at the web server level. You can also do server level application. Okay. Now, when it comes to consistency guarantees, there are some things we need to keep in mind. Okay. So let's say there is an object or some data item in your application that is replicated n times. Okay. Now, if n is greater than 1, which means there are multiple copies, then whenever this object is updated at any of the replica, you have to update it at all of the replicas. Okay, so that you ensure consistency. Now, what consistency technique you pick depends somewhat on how frequently the object is accessed. Okay. In other words, if let's say the read frequency is R and the write frequency is W, that says how frequently is it read and how frequently is it updated. Okay. Then if the write frequency, if the read is much smaller than write, which means it's frequently updated and rarely written, frequently updated and rarely read, then you basically, if you employ a strict consistency guarantee, then it's going to waste a lot of overhead because you're writing frequently. Every time you write, you have to send a notification to all the replicas saying here is the new version of this object. Okay. And you send, so all these messages go out. That's the overhead of the consistency protocol, but it's rarely read. So you're doing all this work trying to keep all the replicas in sync. Okay, but nobody is reading that updated object because the read frequency is very low. Okay. So that says that in such scenarios, you may want to weaken your consistency guarantee because otherwise you pay a higher overhead than may be necessary. Now, if the opposite is true, which means it is frequently read and rarely written, then it is okay to pay the price because you are reading, let's say, this is a popular web page. Let's say it's the home page of some popular news site. So it is frequently accessed. Hundreds of requests per second are reading this web page. Okay, maybe it's written once every 10 minutes or 15 minutes. That's how frequently it's updated. So you have one write, it's infrequent as compared to the number of reads. It's okay to pay the price and update all of the copies. Okay, the effort you put in updating is going to pay itself back because the read frequency is very high. So you will actually read it soon after it's updated. So in such scenarios, you do want to pay the price of stronger consistency, okay, because you will actually get good consistency guarantees and you won't sustain data and so on. So in some sense, depending on the object frequency, you may decide what consistency guarantees to provide, how strict should the consistency guarantees be. Okay. And we'll see where, I already described scenarios where you loosen it. Okay. There are other reasons you may loosen this consistency guarantee simply because you don't want to pay the price at all regardless of the read or write frequency, and you look at those as well. So with that, we are now going to start talking about actual semantics. So first we will look at what are called data-centric consistency models, and then the next class will be client-centric. So in data-centric, what this means is what consistency guarantees do you provide from the perspective of the data store. Okay, this is a replicated data store, meaning that these are disks on independent machines that store copies of the data from the application. Okay. So they collectively form a logical data store. Think of it as a logical disk for the application that spans multiple physical machines. Okay, so you are reading and writing from this logical disk. Okay. Each read and write hits a particular physical disk or a physical replica. So the question is, when a read comes in or a write comes in, what kinds of guarantees should the data store provide with respect to previously seen reads and writes? Okay, that is what we will call a data-centric model. Okay, so in other words, it's a contract between the higher level processes and the data store, which says if the processes obey certain rules, what kinds of guarantees will the data store provide? Okay, I understand that's a little bit an abstract observation, but we will see what this means in practice in the next few slides. Okay? So at a very high level, what the data store needs to do is whenever a read comes in, you want to provide the results of the most recent update. Okay? Any read to a data item should return the most recently written copy of the data item. That's the most recent version. Okay? And if you provide older version, then you are providing inconsistent data. Okay? So that is basically what we are going to try to achieve from our consistency protocol. So all of the protocols or guarantees will attempt to return the results of the most recent write or the last write. Okay? So intuitively that sounds like the right thing to do. But as we will see, because this is a distributed system, even defining what the last write means is not an easy task. Okay? Because its clocks may not be synchronized, or how do you even know what is the most recent write may not always be clear. So depending on how you define the most recent write, that itself will give us a variety of guarantees, and we'll look at those one at a time. Okay? So we'll start with strict consistency. Okay, this is the simplest and the strictest version of consistency. So basically it says any read request always returns the result of the most recent write in the system. Okay? Now to define the most recent write, we have implicitly assumed a globally synchronized clock. Yeah, otherwise you can't even know what the most recent write is. So let's assume that you have a global clock, which you really don't. Given this global clock, then all writes are ordered. Okay, you have a total ordering. So a read may come in and hit any replica. Okay, and that replica should somehow return the most recent write anywhere in the system. Okay, the update for the data item may have gone to some other replica. The read is coming here at the later time, and that read should return the results of that write. Okay. So basically it implicitly assumes the presence of a global clock, and it also assumes that as soon as a write comes in, it is immediately visible to all processes, meaning all replicas. Okay, now that is a strong assumption because that is going to be difficult to achieve in real systems. Okay, can we think about why it is difficult to achieve?
So, I mean, unless all processes are connected to the exact same replica, then they're all going to be separate replicas, and you'd have to, send the data out to all of them.
Yeah. So not all processes are connected to the same replica. Clearly, we have a distributed store. Yeah. So we have, and we haven't said anything about how far away these replicas are. These could be separated by internet link connection, right? So one replica could be in one continent, another replica could be in another continent. We haven't said anything. LAN or a WAN, it doesn't matter. Strict consistency says anytime a write comes in, so let's say you write to data item A, okay? Any read anywhere in the system, okay, subsequently should return the version of A that was written to by this write. Okay? Now the reason it is difficult to achieve is that you have at least some network delays. Okay? So let's say this write comes in. And now as soon as the write hits this replica sends messages to all other replicas saying, here's the most recent version of A, it has been updated. Okay. So here you will basically send, let's say you just forward the write. That's the simplest thing to do to this other replica. Okay. Now that is going to traverse a network. Okay. It is going to take some finite amount of time for that write to propagate from replica 1 to replica 2. Okay. What if the read actually comes before the write has propagated to the other? Whatever that time is, let's say it takes 1 millisecond for that write to traverse the network and reach the other replica. Okay, so what if this read came half a millisecond after this write? Even before the message has even reached the other replica, your read has come in. Based on our definition, this read needs to return the results of this write because this write has come in before the read. But you don't even have enough time for the message to propagate. Okay? So this replica is not even aware, okay, that this read has even appeared because it hasn't even gotten that notification. The notification is in transit. Okay? So as you can see, there are all these scenarios which make strict consistency somewhat difficult. It's not impossible. There are scenarios by which you can certainly delay that read and wait for any notifications to appear and then reply to it. There's nothing that says as soon as the read comes in you have to reply. You can certainly wait, okay, but you don't know how long to wait and so on. So if you immediately return the results, then you would basically not be providing strict consistency because the write has appeared and the notification of that write is still in transit. It hasn't even reached that. So it is an ideal form of consistency which says you will never return stale results. Okay. But it assumes that somehow you have to agree on the ordering, that there is a global clock, okay, which you implicitly assume here. This write may be in transit, but when it reaches this other replica, what timestamp should it pick for the write? How does it know what is the exact time? Because these clocks cannot be actually perfectly synchronized, as you already see. So there are all these real world problems that you have to deal with, but that's what strict consistency is. A very simple idea, but difficult to achieve in practice because of various reasons. So now we'll start relaxing strict consistency and get a spectrum of techniques. Okay, they all sound somewhat similar, but they are slightly different. Yes,
so are there any examples where strict consistency, because like I'm sure in websites and news web server updates it's not used. So are there any real life examples?
Okay, the question is, are there any real life examples of where strict consistency is used? So strict consistency is expensive. So if you use it, you have to be willing to pay the price. Most systems do not actually provide strict consistency. They allow for some tolerances and they will actually weaken it in some scenario. But when we come to the web, we will see there are ways by which you can actually implement strict consistency if you want to. The real systems choose to pay the price is up to the designer, application design. So it is not impossible, but it is expensive. So most systems tend not to implement it because of it. Okay. So the next one step weaker than strict consistency is 2 steps weaker, as you will see, but it's somewhat weaker is the notion of sequential consistency. Okay, so this essentially assumes the following. It assumes that all operations within processes are executed in some sequential order, and within a process you basically respect program order. Okay, so any interleaving will be allowed. Okay, all processes have to agree on the interleaving, and then within that interleaving each process has to respect program order. So what this means is the following. So here are 4 processes and here the x-axis is time, okay, and you are showing some reads and writes, okay, that this process is executed. Program order means what order this process execute those read and write requests. Okay, you cannot violate it. So if one operation happened before the other operation, in any interleaving you have to agree that this operation has happened before that operation, because that's the order in which that process executed. Okay? But what is allowed is you order all the reads and writes here, and then you take some interleaving, you just interleave them in some way, and make all the processes agree that that is the interleaving we will all agree upon. Whether that is what actually happened in practice, we will not worry about, because there is no global clock. Okay? So what that also means is, let's say here you have a write for this process and a write for this process. Okay? Now if you had a global clock and you time order, you can see this write has actually come before this write. Okay? But in reality, you don't have a global clock. So within these processes, you can then order them in either way. Okay? And so long as they all agree that that's the order, so you can interleave them as this write followed by that write, or that write followed by that write. And so long as you agree on it, you are fine. Okay? So what you can see here, okay, is the first read at P3 is returning B, and the second read is returning A. Same is true here. Okay? So what this means is the order that these four processes have agreed upon is that this write happened before this write, even though in real time it was the opposite. But they said, we don't know what actually happened, because there is no perfect clock synchronization. We just have to agree on some ordering, and we'll just agree on this ordering. And so that is also allowed in the case of sequential consistency. So you will see why is this a weaker form. If you had strict consistency, you would not have allowed this. You would have always said this read should always return at least A and then B, never B and then A. Okay. If you have written B and A, that means that this replica is first seeing this write and then that write. Okay. So it's seeing the writes in a different order than that actually occur. But this is referred to as sequential consistency, because what you are doing is you are respecting program order. Within a program, you will never invert. So if there was a subsequent write here, you will never say that write happened before that write, because that's the one they are executed. Okay, so that's what you have to basically ensure. So you have to ensure that program order is maintained, and any interleaving is allowed, so long as everyone agrees on what is that interleaving is. Okay. So this is referred to as sequential consistency, and here is a counter example that says this is not sequentially consistent, because these are the same two writes. P3, first when it reads X, it gets B, and then when it reads X again, it gets A. Okay, so this replica has seen P2's write before P1's write. P4 is seeing it in the opposite order. It's seeing A followed by B. Okay. So in this case, so we'll say that is not sequentially consistent, because these processes are not agreeing on the order of these writes. One is seeing the writes in order A, 1, 2, and the other in the opposite order. So this is not sequentially consistent. They at least have to agree. Okay. So pick one. It doesn't matter which one you pick, but they all agree that that's the order. If you just see them in different order, then this is not going to be sequentially consistent. Yes.
So would multicasting help with this?
Okay. Question is, would multicasting help with it? So this is not saying anything about how you implement this. This is what I said. These are definitions. So when you design your application, you should ask, what consistency guarantees will I provide? Is it strict consistency, is it sequential consistency, we'll see linearizability and others. Once you pick a particular consistency semantic, then comes the question you're asking, say, how do I implement it? Okay. At this point, we are not talking about implementation techniques at all. Okay. There are many different ways to implement it. You may use multicasting, but that's not going to be enough. You have to have additional protocol messages to agree that this is the ordering which we all agree upon. Okay. Multicasting simply tells you a write has occurred and propagates it, doesn't force an ordering. Okay. Right. So that's sequential consistency. Next is linearizability, which basically takes. Okay, one question.
In which case would a sequential consistency be useful in the sense? I mean, why would A be better than B in some case? Not able to appreciate that.
Okay, are you asking if you had done A followed by B, is that better?
I mean, if P3 and P4 have a different order of reads.
P3 and P4 have a different, so here P3 and P4 have a different order of reads. This is not sequential consistent. This is sequentially consistent. The same figure where you had A, B would also be sequentially consistent because they are still agreeing on the order. Okay? But if you see BA and AB, that's not sequentially consistent because that's saying that the reads have been ordered differently by two different processes, or they are seeing the reads in writes rather in two different order.
But in which case it would be a preferred choice?
In which case would you want sequential consistency? It's a model, okay? Whether that's what you want depends on the scenario that you use. Okay? So for I can give you a counter example of where you don't want something like that. So let's say that's a banking database. Okay, and so these are two different. These are replicas of the bank database. So let's say these are transactions happening on the bank database. Okay. So now what this is saying is you're seeing the transactions in two different order. Okay. Let's say the transactions, one is you're making a deposit and then you're making a withdrawal. Okay. And for reasons of just sort of hypothetical reason, let's say the deposit exceeds the current bank balance. So if you make the deposit, the withdrawal exceeds the current account balance. So if you process the withdrawal first, your bank balance will go negative and you will decline the withdrawal because you don't have enough money. But if you let the deposit go first, then you will allow it. Right? So in this case, now if these two replicas see them in two different order, you'll have inconsistent result. One will say this shouldn't have happened at all because you should have declined it. The other one would say this is okay. If you do this, they will either agree that the deposit came before the withdrawal or the other way around. And either they will both decline or they will both accept. But you won't get inconsistent result. That one replica says this should not have happened, I should decline this order, and the other one says no, it's acceptable. That will get you into some inconsistent state. Okay, so that's a counter example of when you don't want it to happen. Now, what are scenarios you want it to happen? There may be wide number. Okay, is that clear? Now, going back to the same example, if you could globally order when the deposit and when the withdrawal came by a global clock, then you will always basically have the right answer. But in some cases, if they're being made at different places, the clocks are not synchronized, they're made approximately at the same time, you can't figure out which of the two actually came. So you have to just agree on it. Customer may or may not be happy, but bank will say, this is the order in which we received it. Okay, so that's basically the way you do it. Okay. So next up is linearizability. This is actually stronger than sequential consistency. So this is between strict and sequential because it does everything that sequential does and it adds more conditions. Okay, so in particular, what it also says is you do whatever sequential consistency did, you agree on or interleaving and so on. But in addition, if there is a timestamp associated with every event, every read or write, if the timestamp of X is less than timestamp of Y, then that operation should precede the other operation. So this is like saying if there's a happened before relationship between those two, then you can't violate it. Okay? So if they're independent events, you pick one of those order. Doesn't matter which one you pick. If they're dependent by some reads or writes, then you are required to pick the order that is given to you by dependency. You cannot just say they happened in some other order. Okay, in this case, you can pick an order. It doesn't matter. Okay, we didn't say if they're related by some timestamps or some messages in between, then you have to respect that order. You are allowed to do anything. Okay, in linearizability, you are not allowed to do that. Okay, so just a quick difference between linearizability and this last time we talked about serializability. Serializability is a concept that's used in databases. Okay, they are used at a transaction level. Okay, so we said that you basically pick an order of transactions as if they executed sequentially. Linearizability is basically at the granularity of reads and writes in a distributed data store. It's not a concept that's applied to transactions. Okay. You're talking about reads and writes and you're trying to find an order in which those reads and writes occurred. So what should the read return? Okay. Which write should it return? So that is what we are trying to do here. Okay. So here's an example of three processes, P1, P2, P3. They have three variables x, y, z. Each of them will set x equals 1, y equals 1, z equals 1, and then they print the other two. Okay. They all execute concurrently. As a result of that, those 6 statements will be actually executed in some interleaved order. Okay. And then the question is, what are they allowed to print? So you will see here are several different orders, okay, for x, y, and z. And then each of those prints something because you have this 3 print statements, so they will print a string of zeros and Okay, and what is being shown here is, and then here y-axis is of course time, so that's the order in which they got interleaved. So in this case, all of them are going to see or be valid from a linearizability perspective. Okay? And the reason for this is there is, although this may not be apparent, there are messages these processes are passing between one another. Okay? It's not clear just by looking at this, but you can actually, if you see what their processes are doing, they are exchanging implicit messages. How is that?
It was printing a variable that's present in the other process.
So x, y, and z are shared variables in this case. There's no implicit message passing, but by simply writing to x and then reading x in some other process, okay, you have sent a message. Okay, you put a value into a shared buffer that's x. Some other process has picked up the value. That's like sending a message from one to another. Okay. That is going to give you a happened before relationship between this and this. Okay. In particular, if you have x equals to 1, any subsequent print cannot print a value of 0 because you already wrote to that and now you are reading from that shared buffer, so that's a message. So this should always return at least x equals 1. Okay. So anything that basically once x equals 1, y equals 1 and z equals 1 are executed, any subsequent print statement that involves printing the value of that variable always have to return 1. If they return 0, then they will violate linearizability because they will violate this condition saying if timestamp of x is less than timestamp of y, then that operation proceeds. Okay. Is that clear? So this is also reads and writes, although we have shown this as assignment. This is basically your reading and writing memory variables, not for reading or writing to disk. But it says if you have written and then subsequently you have read, then you better at least get what was written, not something that was old. Otherwise you will violate linearization. Okay. So here is yet another concept that looks similar to linearizability, which is called causal consistency, and that also says causally related writes must be seen in the same order. Same kind of concept, and you will see here, so this was like the example we showed before. So you have two writes, okay, but these two writes are preceded by a read here. Okay, so you write the value a to this variable x, then you read it here and you got a. Okay. So this process has now seen that write, and that's basically implicit message that has gone from here to here. Okay. And now it has subsequently written b. Okay. So these two writes are now causally related, okay, because this write has happened before this write, or so this write has happened before this read, because whatever was written here has been read. Okay. And then clearly these two are related because they are events in the same process. So this write has happened before that write. Now that you have that implicit ordering, you actually have to ensure that any two reads will always read A before B. You cannot have the opposite ordering. Basically what that says is this is not permitted. Okay, here you are actually seeing this write first and that write later. Okay, that's not permitted. So you basically want to be always A, B, at least. Okay, is that clear? As to why they are causally related. Because of this read, they are causally related. Here's a scenario where we remove that intermediate read. Okay, this thing is gone. Okay, so now you have two writes, and now they have become independent writes because there is nothing that is linking these two processes. So you write here and you write there. Okay. Since they are independent, then you can see them in whatever order. You don't even have to agree on the order. So then this is permitted, where this process sees B before A and this process sees A before B. Because we have said if they are causally related, see them in the same order. If they are not causally related, you don't even have to agree on the order. In sequential consistency, you at least have to agree on the order. Because the same example there had said that both of them have to see them in the same order. Here we are saying if they are not related, they are independent event. We don't care what order they see it. If they are causally related, then you should ensure that the same order is seen. Okay? Any questions here?
In the not commute case, when is it not consistent?
What's the question?
In this case, the not posited case, why would it not be consistent?
You should have always seen A and then B.
But
Because
if-
this B and then written A, that says that you saw the second right before the first right, which is wrong, because you should have seen them in the same order. Okay? Because this right happened before this right, so you can see A, B. You can also see B, B. Two reads could return the same value, because you may basically the second right may overwritten the first even before the read happened. But what you don't want is the opposite. Okay, so that's the spectrum. We have some other techniques that are coming up. There's one more called FIFO consistency, which just says, just forget about ordering across processes, it's too complicated, can't figure it out. Just ensure that you order only within a process. Okay? So I don't know what is happening across processes, but as far as single process is concerned, I see the writes from that process in the order in which it is executing writes. This is referred to as FIFO consistent. Writes from process are seen in order, writes from different processes could be seen in different order. Okay, so you don't even assume whether they're causally related or not. It just says respect program order. When process 1 writes to a file and then writes again to a file, I don't want to see the second write before the first write, because they were from the same process. That's all I'm going to enforce. What has happened across processes is too complicated to figure out. So it's a very weak form of consistency. Okay, it's called FIFO consistency.
So does that mean that the processes don't share any timestamps, or they don't have any logical clocks scenario in them? Or?
Yeah, FIFO consistency doesn't require you to do any real logical clock. All that it requires you to do is you can simply have a counter in each process, and then you basically, as each write occurs, you increment the counter. So you want to ensure that anyone else sees those writes in that order. That's all. You don't have to exchange messages or do anything like that. Okay. So now, although all of this is sounds good from a definition standpoint, but many systems don't even implement this weak form of consistency. They basically say doing it on a per write basis is too difficult. So let's not even bother. Let us do it at certain points in time of the process execution. So for instance, if you have synchronization primitives, if you say take a lock or enter a critical section or exit a critical section, let's not assume let's not worry about what happened before. Before entering a critical section, take a pause, ensure everything is consistent, and then enter. Okay, and then do whatever you want. Okay. So this says rather than looking at it on a per write basis, I just synchronize at certain points in time. Okay, what is happening between the synchronization points, we don't care. Okay, so essentially you will see you could do this either at entry points of the critical section or exit points. Okay? You can say when you exit a critical section, you take a pause, you make sure everything is synchronized, or just before you're entering, you decide I synchronize everything. So depending on this, you will get what is called either entry consistency or release consistency. But what both of these do is they don't look at individual writes. They just look at certain points in times of execution of the process and say, pause the execution, make sure everything is synchronized before you enter. So then whatever you do inside the critical section will be consistent. Okay, you don't have to worry about on the per write basis. Okay, so this gives us this big table of various schemes. They are sort of roughly ordered from the strictest to the weakest. So we started with strict consistency, and we looked at linearizability, sequential, causal, FIFO. Those are all sort of 4 different forms. And then these were not on a per write basis. Here you are doing it on a per critical section basis. So this is a weak form of consistency, and you can do either at release time or entry time. So you synchronize everything either at entry time or release time, all the data stores. So this is a spectrum of definitions, okay, starting from strict to weak. Okay. Now, as I was saying, we haven't said anything about how you implement any of those. I haven't given you any algorithm. These were all definitions. Okay. So, as it turns out, implementing even these weak forms of consistency can incur substantial overheads. So many systems don't even go that far. Okay. So what they simply do is what is called eventual consistency. Okay, eventual consistency is just a nice way of saying there are no guarantees at all. Okay. Basically, it says writes will be propagated to data stores, Data stores will be eventually consistent. There are no guarantees made on when you update a data item, when does it propagate. Okay? That will happen eventually. That's all you say. Okay? So until it's consistent, data will be stable, and that's okay. Okay? That's basically, so most of the systems, actual systems actually use this form of consistency. It's used in many different scenarios. Real systems also use eventual consistency. So what happens, so here, so DNS and many other examples. So here the way eventual consistency is implemented is very simple. This is also referred to as pairwise exchange. So there are n replicas. Okay? So the way you actually go about doing this is randomly replica I contacts replica J. And say, I talked to you yesterday at noon, send me all the updates that you have seen since noon yesterday. Okay? And then you exchange. And then you say, here are the updates I have seen. So you do some pairwise exchange. So randomly you will basically propagate changes every once in a while. Okay. How frequently you do this, none of that. So you can do it once an hour, once a day, once every 5 minutes. It's up to the system. Okay. So no guarantees on when changes will propagate. They can propagate eventually. Okay. This is often used in DNS. Okay. So if you actually have registered a new domain at any point, when you register a domain, your domain registrar will say it may take 24 hours for these changes to be visible. The reason for this is DNS uses eventual consistency. The master DNS server where you made the update has the change, but it will slowly propagate. That DNS server will eventually talk to some other DNS server saying, here are some new registrations, take them. And then they will propagate through the system. Okay? On an average, these servers talk to one another every few hours. Okay. Which is why I say it may take up to a day before it is visible. Okay. So until then things may be out of date, depending on which server you pick. It may say I have never even seen this entry, or I have seen this entry. You may get inconsistencies. After a while everybody sees those changes and things are consistent again. Okay. Same is true if you actually have used any Unix system to change your Unix password. Okay, because the password database is also replicated. Okay, when you change your password, your updated password goes to one replica. Okay. It doesn't immediately send it out to other replicas. Every hour or every few hours they talk to one another saying, send me all new updates. Okay, and then they replicate. So you will actually see this happening if you go and change your password on one machine. Okay, and you walk to some other machine and you try to enter your new password, it may not have seen it. It will actually say incorrect password and force you to use the old one, because that machine is talking to another replica of your password database, which has not yet seen the change. Now, all of these from a human perspective, you just deal with this as a minor inconvenience. But from a system perspective, it is vastly simplified, your system design, because you are saying that I'm not going to provide any real consistency at all. And so eventually things will propagate through the system, all the updates, and you will see them. Until then, you have to deal with some inconsistencies. Real systems actually use eventual consistency quite a bit. We are going to come back to it and talk about ways to do this. I already mentioned that is cheap to implement and so. Okay, so one important difference here is in eventual consistency, because things are out of date for some arbitrary periods of time, you may get what are called write-write conflicts. Okay? Where the same data item is updated in two different places more or less at the same time. So as changes propagate, they will conflict. Okay? And then it's left to the user to deal with this. So eventual consistency is used in many different scenarios. So another example of eventual consistency is shared calendars. Okay, let's say you have a Google Calendar, okay, and then you can access the Google Calendar on your browser. Let's say you also have it on your phone. Okay. What you could do, or you could try, you could actually go and make an appointment on the browser version of your calendar. Okay. Let's say you book an appointment for noon. Okay. And then you go to the phone version of the calendar and you put a different appointment for noon on the same day. Okay. So you have now made two different appointments, okay, on two different systems in the same calendar. But because these systems are using eventual consistency, your phone doesn't immediately propagate this change to the server. It may take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. After every so often it will go and refresh. At that point the change will go. Same thing with the browser is going to update the server, but it's not pushing the change. So now you will see what is called a write-write conflict, because you made appointment for the same time or two different appointments for the same time. That's a very simple scenario of what's called a write-write conflict. Same thing happens in any eventually consistent system. Okay. In particular, if you go and change your password on two different machines that are tied to two different replica more or less at the same time, you'll get another write-write conflict. Because you have two versions of your new password floating around, most servers don't know which is the more recent one, and things will go out of sync. Okay. So this problem will occur simply because you are not using any stronger forms of consistency. You updated the same object twice before the changes had fully propagated, and the system doesn't know which is the more recent one. It will simply flag it as a write-write conflict. Okay. And this kind of scenario we'll see over and over again in any system that actually use eventual consistency. Okay. If you use Dropbox, you will see the same problem. Okay. If you are actually have Dropbox to share documents, you can open a Word document on two different machines, okay, and write to both and then save them. And because they're eventually consistent, they'll try to synchronize eventually and see that the same document was changed twice more or less at the same time. It will create a conflicted copy. And I don't know which is newer. There are two changes. I don't know which one to overwrite. And we'll just throw up its hand and say, you figure it out. So we'll come back to eventual consistency in a little bit. But there are some other definitions to provide which are client-centric. Okay, just some very quick ones. So client-centric definitions say rather than ordering reads and writes from the perspective of the disk or the data store, why not order reads and writes from the perspective of the client? If a client has seen some version of this file, when it reads it again, what should it see next? Forget about what the data store is doing. Why not look at it from the perspective of who is reading and writing, the processes of the client? Okay, if you have guarantees of those sort, you have what are called client-centric consistency. Okay, there are some simple ones. Okay, so a definition called monotonic reads, monotonic writes, read your writes and writes follow reads. Monotonic reads basically says once you read a data item or a file, subsequent reads on the data item at least give you either the same version or a newer version. Okay? So once you read a file, you cannot get an older version. So you may ask, why would I even get an older version to begin with? And there's a figure here which should have been on the next slide. Here is an example. Okay? Here is a distributed data store. Here's a client. Okay? Client reads the file. Okay? The file is returned from this replica. And let's say you get a file that was modified 5 minutes ago. Okay? Subsequently, the client, let's say this laptop travels to some other location and tries to read the same file from this distributed data store. If you have monotonic reads, this replica is not allowed to return any older version of the file than was retrieved here. It has to at least give it that version or a newer version. It can't say, I don't have anything newer, I have yesterday's version here, take it. That's not allowed. You have to at least give that version or a newer version. Okay, so that is what is referred to as monotonic reads. Okay, monotonic writes, similar concept from a writes perspective, saying a write must be propagated to all the replicas before a subsequent writes from the same process. This is like FIFO consistency. This is saying if I send a write and another write, they are seen in the same order. You can't say send them in different order. Okay. Read your write says a read of X always returns the write of X from that same process. If I have written to a file, if I read it, I should at least see the version I wrote, not some older version that somebody else wrote. Okay, that is what is called read your writes. Okay, if I modify it, at least give me the version I wrote it, regardless of which replica I connect. Okay, don't give me an older version that somebody else did. Okay. Write follow read says a write following a read taking place, which will take place on the same or more recent version of X. Okay, which basically says if you read something and then write it, at least write to that version or a newer version. Don't overwrite an older version. Okay, very simple but small variants of the same idea, which basically says look at it from the perspective of the client. If you have shown the client a certain version, client goes somewhere else, don't give him an older version subsequently. At least give that version or a newer version.
Does this make use of client-side caches for achieving this?
Does this make use of client-side caches? Again, implementation issue. You may have caches which cache at least that version that will allow you to do this. You may not have caches, in which case you would have to implement this from a system perspective. The system would have to somehow track, this is client X, what has the client X read until now? Okay? And make sure that any version that is returned is at least that version, not an older version and so on. So you could do it using caches, you could do it using some other techniques. Okay? So now we'll come back to this notion of eventual consistency and see how to implement. So until now everything was definitions. Okay? This is the only implementation we are going to see. Okay? And the only reason I put this up as opposed to implementing strict consistency and so on is I said they're far too expensive. Most systems actually don't use it. Some do, but most of them don't. Many of them simply do this very trivial form of eventual consistency. Okay? Now one way to implement eventual consistency is notion of epidemic protocol. There is a broad class of protocols that all implement of some form of a eventual consistency model. Okay? And the way it was designed was there was this system called Bayou that was implemented, I think it was late 80s or maybe early 90s at Xerox PARC. PARC was a research lab of Xerox Corporation. It still exists today. And so this was a project being done there. And what they were trying to do was design a system that had laptops that were communicating with one another to exchange some data. And in those days and even today, when you have laptops, you have to assume that laptops are not always connected to the network. You have a laptop, you shut it, you go off, ride a bus or something, and then when you're in the bus, it's not connected to anything. Then you go back and you reconnect, you go home, you are reconnected. Okay, so our mobile devices are examples of machines that are what are called weakly connected, which means they're not always connected to the network. They disconnect and reconnect at a subsequent time. Okay. Then the question is, if you have this kind of scenario where the machines themselves are not always connected, how do you implement consistency to begin with? Okay. Let's say you wanted to implement strict consistency. Okay. Write comes. You want to propagate it to all the replica. Replica is data is on a laptop. It's not even connected to the network. How do you tell it? You cannot. Right? So there are this whole class of protocols that I talked about. Assume that all the nodes are actually connected. You can at least propagate those changes to those nodes as soon as the write comes and so on. But as soon as when you have mobile devices, all bets are off because these devices are fundamentally weakly connected. You cannot assume they have the same level of connectivity as a desktop that's on the Ethernet LAN that's always up or a server. Okay? These machines will be disconnected. So then the question is, what kinds of guarantees can you give? Consistency guarantees when your machines themselves are not connected. Okay, data may be changing, but I can't tell the machine. Or you may have changed the data on your machine, it cannot tell anyone else that the data has changed. Okay? So that is the context in which they came up with the notion of eventual consistency. Okay? So basically they said, if you are not connected, you have to give very weak form of consistency that eventually you will reconnect. Eventually any changes you have seen will propagate out, or any changes that are made outside will propagate in. At that point things may become consistent again. Right? So that was basically the whole notion of eventual consistency. How it was designed in those days, it still is a very useful concept. Now how to implement it was this, that the reason it's called epidemic protocol is they basically said, how do you implement eventual consistency? You said, let's use some ideas from real life of how infectious diseases spread. Okay, this is why it's called epidemic, because you want to treat an update as if it's a germ that is spreading through the system. And you want to spread this germ as quickly as possible to all the nodes, create an epidemic. Okay? So that's the basic idea. So how do epidemics, how do diseases spread, infectious diseases? Okay? They spread to what is referred to as pairwise exchange. Okay? You have a bad cold, okay, you go and shake hands with somebody, you pass on your germ. That person falls sick, they do the same thing and other people fall sick. Okay? This is referred to as pairwise exchange. Nodes I and J connect, they exchange some data and they infect one another. Okay? So what are you trying to infect? An update is an infection you want to spread. So you will basically do the same pairwise exchange. Node I will pick node J at random. And node J, that when it's connected, it will pick node J at random and it will push all of its updates to that node. It will get all of the updates from the other node. Yeah? And this process will continue randomly. So as soon as one write hits, it will randomly spread through the system. Whenever the first node talks to a second node, it will spread to the second node. Now each of these two nodes have the infection, they'll spread it to two other nodes and so on. So it will basically quickly spread through the system, and the update will be seen by a large fraction of noise exchange scenario. And this is how you basically design any class of epidemic protocol. Now how frequently does node I talk to node J? All of that is left to a specific implementation. The basic idea is the same. Okay, randomly select a node and do pairwise exchange of data using. Okay. So there are some definitions we will use to sort of analyze this a little more. So we'll call a data store an infective store if it has an update that it wants to spread. This is a node that has seen a write either from a user or a write from some other node that has given it, it wants to spread it. Okay. A susceptible store is a store, data store that has not yet seen the infection, not yet seen that write. Okay. So you want to make all the replicas or all stores infected as quickly as possible. So in some sense, infected stores should try to talk to susceptible stores and spread this infection. Okay, so how quickly you do this depends on what the protocol is going to do, okay, how aggressive it is and so on. There are many algorithms to do this. We are going to talk about two. Okay. The first one I already mentioned briefly. This is called anti-entropy. The server picks P, picks server Q at random, and they exchange updates. Okay. Updates could be push, pull, or both. Push says that I contacted you, so I'm going to push changes, but I'm not going to ask you for changes. You can either contact me and push, so all updates go one way. Pull is also one way, but I contact you and ask you for updates. Okay. You could of course do both. When you have contacted another node, why not give that node your updates and ask for both? Okay, so try to push, pull, or both. Now here is a small property of epidemic protocol which says a pure push-based approach does not help spread updates quickly. If your epidemic protocol was just push-based, then it says that it is not very effective at pushing updates. Can you think of why?
If there's two updates that's trying to push, one's later than the other, to try to wipe it backwards.
Okay, so you're talking about two updates and wiping it backwards. That's true. We'll come to two updates in a little bit. Let's think of just one update. In fact, you shouldn't even think of stores. You should just think of, you are in this class, let's say you have a code. How quickly can you spread the code to everyone else in the class? Okay, if you just use a push-based approach where you go and shake people's hands randomly, okay, is that going to actually work in terms of spreading the updates to everyone? Yes.
So this is kind of like metaphorical, but like as opposed to like shaking people's hand, you can touch the doorknob or some other bottleneck.
Yes. Yes, you can touch a doorknob, yes. But that's not the question. You just use the push-based approach, then will it work? So,
In
so
case
the,
of push, it will only work when the server which is pushing has the new update, and only in that case it will work. Otherwise, it won't spread. Whereas in case of push pull, if either of the two servers have it, the update would spread.
okay, so that's a good observation. So remember that any server is either infected or susceptible. Infected means already gotten infected, or it is yet to see. Okay, think of how a push-based would work. Initially, only one server has the update. Okay? At this point, the infection is going to spread quickly. It will pick any node at random. It hasn't seen the update because it's the only one. So it will spread it. Those two will start spreading again. Okay? So the infection, so anytime you pick a server at random, the probability that it's susceptible is very high at the beginning because only a few nodes have seen the infection. The vast majority of nodes haven't seen anything. So you practically pick anyone, they will get infected immediately. Okay, but after a little while, a reasonable fraction of nodes have already seen the infection, and the fraction of nodes that are susceptible keeps shrinking. Okay. Now at this point, if you toss a coin and pick a node at random, the probability that you pick a susceptible node keeps on shrinking because the fraction of people or servers that have not seen the infection is very small. So very likely you'll see another susceptible or infected server, and you try to exchange, there is nothing to exchange because they've already seen it. So you will say there is nothing to do. Okay. So So if you have a poor push-based approach, okay, after a while, initially the infection spreads very quickly. After a while, trying to infect the small number of yet to be infected server becomes harder and harder because you are picking at random. Okay? And if you have 100 nodes and only 2 are yet to be infected, okay, the probability that you toss a coin and pick a server, with high probability you'll always pick another infected server, not the susceptible. Okay? So that's a pure push based. If you had a pure pull based, the opposite is true. Okay? Which means in the initial phase, there's only one server that's infected. Everybody is not infected. So you toss a coin, pick a server at random saying, do you have an update? Server will say no, okay, because only one that has the update. So initially it will spread very slowly because nodes are talking to one another and pulling, but there is nothing to pull. Okay, but after a while, maybe some node happens to pick this infected server and it gets it. Now 2 have the infection, and so it will spread very slowly. Okay, but once it spreads, it will after a little while it will spread quickly because as more and more servers have this infection, when you try to pull it, the probability you pick an infected server keeps going up. Okay, it will spread quickly. Okay. So now you have these 2 opposite scenarios where in one case you have a good initial startup phase but a sort of a very long end case where you are trying to infect the last few stores, and the opposite is true. So if you combine push and pull, you get good properties. Okay. Because push, if you have both, meaning you do pairwise exchange, you just ask for updates and you also push updates. Okay. So you do both push and pull every time you talk to a server. This works very well because in the initial phase, the push works very well. Okay. In the latter phases, since nodes are also pulling, the yet to be infected servers will try to pull. They will contact some other server and say, give me an update. And since most of them are infected, they will quickly pull.
But in the case of this thing, pull approach, if you have a centralized repository where you always know that this is the place I'm going to get my update, then isn't it equivalent to push and pull? Why would I go for a push model? Or, I mean, either push and pull would actually do.
So you are asking if it's a centralized repository or centralized update, why would you not use either? So this doesn't assume any centralized scenario. It just assume update can occur anywhere. Okay, and then you are basically just trying to propagate it. If you have a centralized entity where everybody pushes their changes and then everybody pulls it back, that's how source code repositories work. Clearly, as you can imagine, your central source code repository, you push to the master server and you pull, then none of these problems occur. Okay? This is pairwise exchange. This is fully distributed, no central entity at all. If you have a central entity, you can do it some other ways. You have pairwise exchange even when you are centralized entity. This does not assume this.
Even without the knowledge of the topology, shouldn't the pull and the push spread at the same rate? Because suppose there are 5 servers and just one server has got an update, and any 2 servers randomly can choose the other one. So in any case, there is very high chance initially that 2 servers that are susceptible will try to communicate with each other. The infection is only with one server. So shouldn't the rate be similar for both pull and push?
So in push, the initial phase it will spread faster. This push says, if I contact you, I'm going to push my changes. If you have changes or not, I'm not going to ask you for that. I'm only going to push. Right? So in this case, clearly the one that got the first right will talk to someone else at some point in time and push it. And then those 2 will contact some other servers and push it, and quickly things will multiply. In the pull case, what will happen is only one node has it. So there are lots of nodes talking to one another, but none of them have seen anything. When you try to pull from another node that hasn't seen it, you can't do anything. At least one of them has to contact the infected node for the update to spread it out. That probability is very low. It's 1 over n in probability where you have n nodes, right? So that's the problem. So that's anti-entropy. Very quickly I'll talk about the other one. This is called rumor mongering. Okay. This is why this class of protocols, which are epidemic protocols, are also called gossip protocols. Okay, because this is basically how rumors spread. Okay, this is similar to how diseases spread. Rumors also spread the same way, which is you have a hot piece of news that you want to spread. You talk to some friends and you tell them. They talk to some friends and quickly lots of people know it. But what happens when you're trying to spread a piece of gossip? After a while, you think that everybody knows it, so you stop spreading it. Right? Because there's no point when everybody knows what the gossip is that you go keep telling everyone. You just say, okay, now it seems to have become well known, so I just stop. Okay? Same protocol, same idea is true in the groomer mongering protocol, also called gossiping, which is when you try to receive an update. When you first receive an update, P will try to push it to a random server Q. Okay? Now, if Q has already seen the update, okay, then you will toss a coin. With probability 1 over k, you will say that this seems to be well known already, I'm going to stop, I'm not going to continue this anymore. Okay? So you'll toss a coin, if the coin says heads, you continue. You contact another server R and you try to push it. But if the coin says tails, you say I stop, because you already seen it. If you haven't seen it, you will continue, but the first time you see it, you will toss a coin. So there's a probabilistic back off. Okay? So as soon as you see that nodes have seen the update, you try to stop spreading it probabilistically by tossing a coin. Okay? There's some questions.
This seems push oriented, so like in the same sense with anti-entropy, you could combine both of them and have some servers that haven't gone yet pulled.
Yes, so you could certainly combine both. But this is basically saying this is how gossip spread. You don't go to some random friend and say, do you have a piece of gossip to it?
Yeah.
Typically the person who has the gossip is the one most excited trying to spread it. So that is why it is a push based approach. Okay? Yes, you could combine it. In fact, if you combine it, it will look like anti-entropy with push and pull. The only new thing here is there's a probabilistic back off which says with some toss of coin I stop, saying there's no point, everybody knows this. Okay? So what that also says is that there is some non-zero probability which is shown by this equation. I'm not going to go into that. But there's a non-zero probability that there will be some nodes that will never see the update because everybody has stopped. This is pure push based. Everybody backs off, there is no more spreading. So the small group that has not seen it will never see it. Okay, so that's yes question.
So why the probability is 1 over k and what is k?
Why is it 1 over k? K is a parameter you pick in the protocol. If you pick k equals to 2, then you toss a coin, the probability half in some, when you encounter a server that's seen, you will back off. You can make it as aggressive or as loose as you want. You can pick k to 1000, which means that even if you're seeing it, I aggressively try to contact and keep pushing. Okay. Or if you make it very small, then you will basically stop quickly. So that's a parameter of the protocol saying how aggressive is the back off or not backing off. Okay. So that's not, that's a parameter. If you have that k defined, and this is the probability with some fraction of nodes will never see the update. Okay, so one last point and then I'm going to stop. That point has to do with deleting data in an epidemic protocol system. So we talked about how you update data items. Okay. Now when you delete data items, there are some interesting consequences that result from it. Okay. So let's say rather than updating a record, you delete it. Okay, it's gone from one store. Okay. Now this store is going to contact another store saying, do you have anything that I don't have? Now, since this is the only place that has seen the deletion, that other node still has your record. So that node may say, I have a record that you don't have, and then you pass it back, and this deleted data item has reappeared in the system. Okay. The problem is you need a way to distinguish between deletion and the first creation. Okay. When node A contacts node B, okay, and say, I have these records, you have some other records, what is the diff, and you just exchange the diff, then you cannot distinguish between a deletion and a creation. Because if you're deleting it, I no longer have it. Somebody else has it, so it looks like new to me, so I'm going to take it back. Okay? So that's a problem with epidemic protocols, and you have to treat deletions carefully. You can't simply do what you do, like delete a file, it's gone. Okay? So the way you do it is, you basically, when you delete it, you assign a death certificate to the data item. Meaning you keep the data item, but you mark it with a special label saying deleted. So you treat it as an update to a data item, saying the data item exists but in a deleted form. So you now spread that update rather than simply erasing it from your store. Because if you erase it, it will reappear. Okay, then you can never delete in that sense. Okay, so this is referred to as, you treat deletes as updates by saying this is a file, it still exists, but I mark it deleted. Okay, that's an update. Okay, but if I assign a new label, you spread that, and then once everyone has it, at some later point in time, you can then go and clean up saying, here are data items with death certificate that are 1 month old. Hopefully everybody has it now, so let's actually delete it at this point in time. Okay, and then you clean it up, and hopefully it doesn't reappear because there is some store that I've never seen as death certificate. Okay, so that's basically how you would be treat deletion. Okay, so you want to distinguish between deletion and initial creation. Okay, which look like the same thing. If I have it, you don't have it. I don't know, is that because I deleted it or it's newly created? That's the part you want to distinguish. Okay? So that's all I have to say about epidemic protocols. As I said, they are widely used in variety of scenarios. Dropbox uses it. If you use your phone to synchronize calendars or contacts, they use it. You have source code control repositories, they use it. Okay, you may have centralized ones, or you have Git, which is actually distributed. Okay, Git can do pairwise exchange. You can contact a random Git repository that has the same Git repo, and you can do push and pull at that point. In fact, it does both push and pull. Okay, so there are many real systems that use this form of consistency. Okay, so let's stop here. We'll continue next time with another topic.